We are at 1:02. Thank you again for being here. We are recording this session and we'll post the recording later this month and link it in the newsletter as well as announce it on our website, so y'all will have access to that. We are having some technical difficulties around TEA at the moment. Our partner in crime, Liz Baker, is working to get her internet back as we speak. And she will join us as soon as she is able. So glad to see everyone here. Thank you so much for coming today. Okay, as I'm Shauna Weebush, I'm the Math and Science Director in the Curriculum Division here at the Texas Education Agency. And I will be presenting today with Carla Bailey, who is our Elementary Math and Science Specialist, as well as hopefully Liz Baker, who is our Secondary Science Specialist. On the screen, you see our phone number, as well as the science website, where you can get to a whole bunch of information on new TEKS and some resources we have to support that work. In regard to our format today, we are in a webinar format. That means you have a couple of tools you can use. We do have the chat that everyone's able to see, but we would also ask that you use the Q&A for questions that you would like us to address during this session. That allows us to kind of track the questions, keep them organized, determine which ones we're going to answer aloud, and also it helps us later determine what we want to put into any kind of FAQ or discussion piece after the session. So please use the chat just for general chatting, but then use the Q&A for specific questions that you would like us to address about TEKS Guide. So today, largely, we've got three main goals. The first is to explain what the TEKS Guide is, and then to go through the various components of TEKS Guide. And then we want to answer specific questions about using the TEKS Guide as well. We're going to break this into chunks. We're going to talk about different parts of the TEKS Guide and then answer questions about those parts as we go, and then answer broader questions towards the end of the session. So what the TEKS Guide is it is a resource that will allow clear and consistent interpretation of the new science TEKS by all science educators. Really, the biggest impact on student success in the classroom is the knowledge of the teacher and the teacher's preparedness to share that information. So the better we can prepare teachers, then the better teachers can support students. And that really is the goal for this, is to help teachers understand what the new TEKS mean and how to present that information to their students. In addition, there's a couple of specific pieces that we wanted to make sure that we are highlighting some connections to. With scientific and engineering practices, we want to provide some support, particularly in engineering, about how you might integrate that. It is new to the TEKS. We've had science practices for a while, but now we are intentionally including engineering practices as well. So we want to provide some support pieces for that. In addition, we have a brand new strand of content in kindergarten through 8th grade called Recurring Themes and Concepts. And we wanted to provide some support to educators on how to connect recurring themes and concepts with the content standards that you will be teaching as well. So there are three big components of the TEKS Guide that we are going to go through today. One is the student expectation box. And within that student expectation box and the knowledge and skills, we're gonna see what the standard means. And then we have some support elements for each one of those student expectations that we're going to talk about. We have the overview, which has further explanations, demonstrated proficiency, glossary support, as well as supporting information. And then we have an alignment section where we talk about recurring themes and concepts as a strand in kindergarten through 8th grade. Vertical alignment we'll talk about in kindergarten through the 4 main high school courses that we support. Cross-curricular connections will also be kindergarten through 8th grade. And then we will also talk about the side-by-side documents that we have to support the transition from old standards to new standards. And this is really where we're gonna chunk it. We are going to start with a kindergarten standard, and we're gonna go through all of the components that are currently available within TEKS Guide with that one kindergarten standard. And then we're going to come back and we're going to provide some specific examples for middle school and high school about how some of those support pieces that we have for those grade bands vary and the kind of help they can provide for our secondary teachers. Of course, as we're going through these examples, feel free to explore within the TEKS guide and look at any particular standard or grade level that is of specific interest to you. And I already see questions coming in the Q&A. So thank you very much, y'all. I believe I did have a question about in the Q&A about just making sure how to make sure you're muted. Everybody came into this on mute, so you should be good in the webinar format in that regard. Okay, Miss Carla, are you, oh, she says she's connecting to audio. So I'm gonna keep going here. So before we jump into the actual standards, I do want to kind of show you what components are available at each grade level, all right? The detailed explanation rollovers that we're going to talk about will be available in every single grade level that we have content for. So that's kindergarten through 8th grade, biology, IPC, chemistry, and physics. The demonstrated proficiencies are kinder through 2nd grade. And the reason for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there, but essentially kindergarten through 2nd grade has far fewer resources from which to backward plan when it comes to really ensuring that you know what the kids are supposed to, what performance at grade level rigor looks like for kinder through 2nd. And so we wanted to provide an additional resource for that grade band since it is one that doesn't necessarily have all the same resources out there already that 3rd grade on up does. The further explanations we will be talking about in every single grade level that we have developed content for. Same with glossary support and supporting information or research. And vertical alignment. And then we will be doing the alignment for recurring themes and concepts and for cross-curricular connections specifically through 8th grade. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Carla if she's able to join. Nope. Okay. So let's talk about the student expectation bar. When here in just a minute, I'm going to come out of this Zoom presentation and I'm actually going to take you to the TEKS Guide website. I'm going to walk you through how to get here, and we're going to get you oriented to all the information that is here in the student expectation bar, as well as the knowledge and skills section beneath it. And then we'll pause and I'll take any questions that you have over this particular piece. After we talk about that, then we will shift gears and we will go into the overview section. We'll take questions about that. And then we'll go into the alignment section. We'll take questions about that. And then we'll talk about some specific examples in middle and high school as well. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of the Zoom and bring up TEKS Guide. You go to www.teksguide.org. And I'm going to go ahead and throw that link in the chat for you as well. From here, we are going to science. We are going to kindergarten, because remember, we're going to do our first example of all of the components in the kindergarten grade level on a specific standard. And now we're going to come all the way down to K13B. And when I get here, I can just click on the standard, and it's going to bring up the page for that particular standard. So you'll notice up here at the top is that green bar that you saw the screenshot for, the student expectation bar. For every standard in the kindergarten through 8th grade and the biology, IPC, chemistry, and physics, we have a bar here with the student expectation listed. You will also notice within that student expectation that we have some underlined terms. And you might also see similar things down here in the knowledge and skills statement. We also have some underlined terms. So when you hover over these terms, you'll see one of two things. You'll either see a glossary support, which is a teacher level definition, and we'll talk about that here a little bit more in a moment. or you will see a detailed explanation. All right. So let's start with the detailed explanations here. As a team and using feedback from the field and various groups that we have reached out to and asked for information and asked for feedback from, we've identified particular words or phrases within the TEKS that we felt could use a deeper clarity in order to ensure that every single teacher who reads it has the same understanding of what students should know by the time they're done with this standard. In this particular example, we have the overall standard is the student is expected to identify different structures that animals have that allow them to interact with their environment, such as seeing, hearing, moving, and grasping objects. Well, interact with their environment could be interpreted in a multiple of ways. And so we wanted to make sure that we provided some clarity around what exactly that means. So in this case, and I'm going to see if I can zoom in on this a little bit. There we go. Interact with their environment means the student should understand how the structures of animals make them successful in their environment. And then there is a boundary on here. In Tier 1 instruction, the terms biotic and abiotic are not used to describe components of an organism's environment. Instead, students should be able to use the terms living or once living and non-living. So there's a couple of elements here that I want to discuss. One is that within this detailed explanation, we've emphasized that when we talk about animals interacting with their environment, we really want to get to what makes them successful in their environment, right? Not just that they exist in it, but actually what makes them successful within that environment. And then there's the boundary. The boundary is to help set that expectation for how far the grade level instruction is intended to go for that particular concept. You'll notice all of our boundaries start with the phrase in Tier 1 instruction. So when we talk about Tier 1 instruction, what we mean is what is the content that every single student in that grade level should understand by the time that they leave. This is regardless of whether it's a student who needs some scaffolds and supports to get to that baseline level of Tier 1 instruction, or if you're talking about a student that already knows that information, then you need to start considering what are you going to do to go deeper and enrich for that student. But the goal of TEKS Guide is to help level the playing field and ensure that we have a common understanding of what it means for what is the expectation for every single student in your classroom, regardless of their level. All right, that's what we mean when we talk about in Tier 1 instruction. In this case, we talked about biotic and abiotic as being terms that is not expected to use with our 5-year-olds. We wanted to highlight that because depending on the resource you're looking at, sometimes resources will use language that is above the grade level expectation, and we wanted to call that out and ensure that the language that our kiddos are using in grade 5 is living, once living, non-living, not biotic, abiotic. That being said, if you have the random 5-year-old rolling into your class that knows what a biotic factor is, more power to them. You know you're going to have to do some work to help keep that kiddo engaged. The other piece are the glossary terms. And as I mentioned previously, the glossary terms are teacher level definitions. And I'm emphasizing that because if you take a look at this particular definition, we have a definition here for animals that says a classification of organisms whose cells are eukaryotic, they have a nucleus and organelles, do not have cell walls, and which rely on consuming other organisms for food. Folks, we're not asking you to teach 5-year-olds the word eukaryotic, asking you to, they do not need to know what organelles are or what on earth a cell wall is. However, it is helpful for a kindergarten teacher to have that understanding. Our goal with the glossary terms was to create a common understanding for all educators across the state. Instructional materials will have the student level definitions incorporated in them. We thought it would be more valuable to ensure that all teachers across every grade level have the same understanding of that term. That way it's easier to know where the kiddos are going to go and to have a further, more complex understanding of the terms yourself as an educator. And also now we have our kindergarten teacher has the same understanding of what an animal is as our AP biology teacher does. And we want that common understanding regardless of what you're teaching. Same thing down here in the knowledge and skills statement. Typically in the TEKS, you have several knowledge and skills statements, and then you have student expectations built underneath them. So it's always important when you look at a student expectation to also look at the knowledge and skills statement that it is paired with, because that helps provide some insight into the boundaries and the lens through which you should teach that particular student expectation. In this case, the knowledge and skills statement is organisms and environments. And again, we have a detailed explanation for organisms, because in kindergarten, we want students to understand that an organism is a plant or an animal. Obviously, it's way more than that. But in kindergarten, that's the detailed explanation that kiddos need to understand for organisms. We also have some glossary support terms like processes, structures, and environments. All right, I'm going to take us back to our deck briefly. Okay, so to recap some of the things that I just shared with you here, detailed explanations are the rollovers that call out specific words or phrases, and the idea is to provide that clarity and consistency. They may or may not have boundaries. Not all detailed explanations have a boundary. We tried to save those for detailed explanations that we thought would benefit from that upper limit. It is still up to the educator to provide supports and scaffolds for the students that need it to get to that minimum expectation. And it is still important to provide enrichment for students that are ready to move beyond that baseline expectation. And the other type of rollover that you might see in the student expectation or the knowledge and skills statement are the glossary terms. Again, we want to emphasize that these are to define terms at the teacher level and that definition is consistent in kindergarten through 12th grade. I will highlight for you when we go into the next section that we have a dedicated section for glossary terms as well as any rollovers that you may see. Before we continue, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and see if there's some specific questions that I can answer for you in that resource. Okay, there's a question about the side-by-sides, and I will address that one a little bit later. We do have the side-by-sides for you, so I will be able to share that with you shortly. Let's see, the Texas resource site has draft versions of the TEKS for middle school. Are they still in draft mode, or are we good to go and use them for the upcoming year? You'll need to provide me some more information about what you're referring to. I'm not sure what the Texas resource site is. For the TEKS that are to be in effect starting in August, if you visit the TEA Science webpage, you will be able to access them there. Let's see. I am skipping over some of the broader questions right now. I promise if I'm not answering it right now, I will address it later. All right, actually, there are a couple of broad questions I'm going to address here. There's one that is there a pacing guide for this? So that takes me back a little bit to what TEKS Guide is. TEKS Guide is an explainer for what the standards mean, but we don't intend to be a full curriculum. So we're not going to do a scope and sequence or a pacing guide or anything like that. That is truly a district and campus level decision. We just want to make sure that when you're making those decisions, you are doing so with a full understanding of what the standards mean and what students should be able to know and do by the time they walk away from it. And then there's a question about a resource provided for K2. I promise I'm going to come to that. Yes, I can share. Actually, Julie, could you do me a favor and grab the link for the TEA Science page and put it in the chat for me? Folks, Julie Kuhn is on the line. She is supporting us today as well. She is our coordinator for the Mathematics Achievement Academies, and I'm grateful for her help here today. So thank you for throwing that in the chat for me, Julie.
Sure.
And I will address some more of these questions a little bit later. Okay, one more time, please remember if you have questions to throw them in the Q&A, because that's specifically where I'm looking for questions, and we'll use the chat section for general chat functionality. All right, so we talked about the student expectation bar and the knowledge and skills statement. What we're about to do now is we're going to, using the same standard, that K13B, we're going to take a look at the overview section. Here, we're going to look at demonstrated proficiencies as a resource, as well as further explanations, glossary support, and then supporting information. So let me come back out of the... Okay. So again, we're still on this particular standard, K13B, where we look at the structures that animals have that let them be successful in their environment. I'm going to scroll down here. I'm in the overview section. And here are those 4 tabs in the overview section that you saw in the screenshot. And we'll start with demonstrated proficiency. This is one of the ones I saw in the Q&A. Somebody asked for more information on the resource that was specifically K2. And that is this demonstrated proficiency right here. So what we have done for kindergarten through 2nd grade is we've provided an example of how part of the student expectation may be assessed in a classroom environment. All right. In this case, and let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit to make it a little bit easier for you to read. In this case, you have a couple of different paragraphs. The first one talks about how you might set an activity up for students to participate in, so you could gauge their success with the standard. And then the second part provides you with some ideas of what you might look for or listen for when you are trying to determine what students know and how far along they are in their progress on this particular standard. So here again, the standard itself is that we are identifying structures that animals have that allow them to interact with their environment. And so the demonstrated proficiency says to provide each student with a different animal picture to glue into their notebooks, and that each student will then label what are those structures that they see, find a partner, share the structures, and also discuss how each animal might use those structures. They're going to trade notebooks, and then they're going to go find themselves a new partner and do the same thing with the new notebook that they have. Then what you see in the second paragraph are some suggestions for what you might hear students talking about. So students might explain that animals that have large eyes may be better able to see, allowing them to avoid predators more easily. One of the things I want to highlight here is that not only are you listening for the student to say, oh, that animal's got big eyes, but how does it help them be more successful in the environment? We want to make sure that they're getting to that component of the standard. We also provided some other examples down below. Birds might move with legs or wings. Fish might move with fins. Worms crawl. And in various ways, you're going to want to listen for how are students explaining how it makes that organism more successful in its environment. And we have developed these for each of the content standards in kindergarten through 2nd grade. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because you have several different chunks of the TEKS. You have the scientific and engineering practices, you have the recurring themes and concepts, and then you have the content standards. We didn't want to provide demonstrated proficiencies that were explicit only for scientific and engineering practices or only for recurring themes and concepts, because those should be taught in conjunction with the content standards, right? Scientific and engineering practices are the ways in which we think like scientists and engineers. And so we want to think about science and engineering content using scientific and engineering practices. The recurring themes and concepts are these big picture ideas that we can hang all of our discrete individual facts on in order to create this web of knowledge in our brains. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we don't want to test those things or assess those things independently, only through content, only through the context of content. So I'm going to minimize the demonstrated proficiency, and I'm going to take us next to the further explanation. In this case, I want to zoom it back out a little bit. So you're going to see a lot of different possible supports within further explanations. And this particular one, we wanted to highlight it because it is full of images. One thing I do want to emphasize for you is that the further explanation is background information and context for teachers. There may be resources within a further explanation that are appropriate to share with a student, but that's not the expectation. We develop these with the teacher in mind, not the student, okay? So very rarely will you find a further explanation that you read or look at and you go, yes, I'm going to just take all this information and feed it directly to my kids. 9 times out of 10, it's meant specifically for teacher background information. It may include misconceptions. It may include some vertical alignment notes or deeper scientific understanding than the actual standard calls for from the student. In this case, it includes a lot of different images. One of the things I want to highlight for you is when we did include images, we used Creative Commons images so that they are free for use by anybody in an educational environment. And we've also provided links to make them easy to access. In this particular standard, even though I said that this is primarily a teacher resource, you might choose to use some of these images with your kindergarten students as you are talking about different features that animals have. But our goal in developing it was more to broaden a teacher's thinking around what types of organisms could they bring to the conversation. So oftentimes we'll go to the cute fuzzy mammals and we'll have pictures of cats or bunnies or dogs or what have you. But when we're talking about eyes, we also want to talk about the eyes of organisms like spiders that have multiple eyes all around their face, or even octopi who have their eyes over here on the sides. When we talked about ears, we brought up the rabbit because it's got nice, big, visible ears. But we also wanted to highlight that there's other ear structures that would be helpful to introduce students to. You might want to talk about frogs. You can't see their ears as visibly as you can other animals, but they are there. And then, it was a nice opportunity to remind our kiddos and our teachers that humans are animals too. And you can always talk about human structures and what make them successful in their environments. For movement, we, of course, talked about a mammal walking around on 4 legs, but then we also brought up a cuttlefish, and you might show a video of how a cuttlefish moves, or talking about how butterflies move, because that movement is different than mammals. And then how they eat food and grasp objects. Again, we wanted to provide a variety. Some organisms use their hands, elephants use their trunks, which is pretty unique. And then you have animals that use their mouths for movement as well as for eating, or to grasp objects. So again, the biggest thing was we just wanted to kind of broaden the ideas available here. I'm going to minimize this section. Glossary support, as I mentioned before, is an additional resource for glossary terms. Not all of the glossary terms that we highlighted within a standard are a rollover up top, but all those glossary terms are down here. One of the things that I want to share with you is when we developed this glossary, we did it by identifying words that were in the standard, not additional words that you may need to teach your students. If there are specific words that we need you to teach your students, we've tried to highlight those within a detailed explanation, let you know what language we expect students to be using around something. But these are teacher level definitions, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you one place to kind of see all of those definitions for a particular standard. The last section here in the overview is supporting information. And what supporting information is it's access to research articles that can be used to help enhance the teaching or to provide further research information for the teacher. In kindergarten through 8th grade, the articles are more focused on integration of content and pedagogy. As we shift from middle school into high school, it becomes more focused on the research that's actually happening in the field around that particular content. One of the things that I want to share about research is that these articles are not written about Texas TEKS or about specific grade levels. These articles are written about content more broadly. And so the research articles may not be 100% TEKS aligned. There's one example in, I believe, 7th or 8th grade where it's talking about genetics, and it has students doing Punnett squares as part of the activity in that particular research article. And we got some feedback about that one saying, hey, you told us that Punnett squares were a high school thing. Why are you showing us a research article in a middle school standard talking about Punnett squares? And it's because it's related to genetics, and it was a research article about middle school teaching. So we wanted to share that. And it's an opportunity for enhancement if you have specific students who are ready to go deeper. This goes back to that scaffolding piece where you support kids that need support to get to the minimum expectation, and you provide enrichment for the students that are ready to go deeper or further. So when you look at those research articles, do look at it through that lens of deeper understanding for teachers, possible ideas of where to go next, broad research around that topic, but it may not be narrowly focused on the specific student expectation. So those are the specifics around demonstrated proficiencies, further explanation, glossary support, and supporting information. These are all the sections that are in the overview. Again, I want to emphasize we have demonstrated proficiency specifically for kindergarten through grade 2. And the purpose for that was because the reason we kept it to that grade level is kindergarten through grade 2 has fewer resources when you think about backward design and what does the assessment of these particular standards look like. Starting in 3rd grade, we have a lot more examples of what does appropriate assessment for that grade level look like. And so we wanted to make sure we were enhancing the resources available for our youngest learners. The further explanations, again, are for the teacher, provides additional background information. You may provide misconceptions, vertical alignment, examples, deeper scientific understanding. One of the things that I do want to emphasize there is not every student expectation has a further explanation. Again, just like with the detailed explanations and the glossary terms and the boundaries and all of these pieces, we wanted to highlight the areas where we felt a standard needed more support. That being said, if you're looking at a standard and it doesn't have a further explanation and you're like, I need more support on this, I'm not sure what I should know and where I begin and where I end. Or if you are a coordinator or an instructional leader and you notice your team's struggling around something that we didn't provide a further explanation or a detailed explanation on, please reach out to us. This is a living document. We do make changes. We are working on what do our processes look like for making those revisions. But we don't know what revisions need to be made or what needs to be enhanced until we hear from you. So please do reach out if, as you're looking through things, you're like, this standard, we need some help on this standard. And we will make those adjustments. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break from the slides for a moment and take a look at the Q&A. Okay, there's a comment that says this has the TEKS and then the definition for teachers or students. We must go somewhere else to dig further into the TEKS and get ideas on what to do for hands-on activities that will allow our kids to be successful in class and on STAR. Thank you for that. So this is a clarifier for what the TEKS mean and how far to go with the TEKS, but this is not a curriculum. The goal of this resource is to provide clarity around what the standards mean. Instructional materials goal is to provide those activities and learning experiences for students. Let's see, will TEA eventually put math TEKS on the TEKS guide? TEA is working on a TEKS guide for all the various content areas. I don't have a specific timeline for you, but yes, it is in the plans. And excellent. I've got a few folks that have logged in late. So the website for TEKS Guide is www.teksguide.org. And I just threw it in the chat again. And then will this be available in a mobile device app format or even a PDF for printing? Thank you for that question. So it's just a website for now. I did actually, though, after the last time I got this question, pull it up on my cell phone, and it behaves better than honestly than I expected with the hoverovers in particular. When you click any of those hoverovers on your phone, it does actually pop up with that detailed explanation or that glossary term. That being said, the bigger screen is nice when you are looking at this much text. In regard to PDF, we are keeping it in a virtual format because we do intend to make changes and keep it iterative. And the more people print, then the more version control issues we have with content changing or being enhanced. So it's not designed to be printed. It is designed for teachers and for teams to come back to every time they are looking at this information. We will be, I saw a question in the chat, will this webinar be available to view later? We are recording it, and we recorded the last one too. I'm going to take a look at the 2 recordings, and we will take the best one and get that posted later this month so that you guys have access for the recording. I know particularly at the coordinator administrator level, it's nice to know that you'll have access to this for teacher training. So the short answer is yes, there will be a recording available for this information.
Shauna, just to confirm, that will be available on the science webpage, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Julie. We will post the link to the recording on the science webpage. We will also announce it in the science newsletter. A little bit later in this presentation, I will show you how to get to the science newsletter so that if you're not currently signed up, you will be able to sign up so that you know when you can get notified of these things. All right, so we've talked about the student expectation bar and what the rollovers mean within the student expectation, the detailed explanations, and the glossary terms, as well as the further explanation. And then we also talked about the overview section where the further explanations, demonstrated proficiency, glossary support, and supporting information are. The third section of TEKS guide is the alignment section. In the alignment section, again, in this kindergarten standard, you're going to see all of the possible alignments available. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's available at various grade levels. So on this screenshot, you can see I've got a bright orange arrow pointed to alignments. And you see 3 different alignments available in the dropdown right here. Those are vertical alignment, recurring themes and concepts alignment, and then we also have cross-curricular connections. And then this button right here is that side-by-side that I was referring to earlier, where you can compare the old standards to the new standards that are coming into play in August, so that you can see what kind of shifts you may need to make based upon your grade level or grade band. So to get to the alignment section, you come over here from overview to alignments. And it automatically starts you off on the vertical alignment. So what you'll notice here is the standard that we are currently discussing is the one that's kind of highlighted with a little bit of a green pop out, K13B. And then you see all the standards that progresses towards. In this case, since we're starting with a kindergarten standard, there's nothing above it. But below it, you have a first grade, second grade, third grade, fifth grade. You'll notice there was not one here for fourth grade. And then you've pushed this little next grade button. It pops you up to where does that go in 7th grade, 8th grade, and even all the way up through biology. So you can see kids are starting by looking at what makes students successful in their environment and going all the way to we're analyzing interactions that occur among systems in an organism for various functions, right? That's a long progression. And here you can look at what are the TEKS that get a student from point A in kindergarten to point however many down the alphabet in biology. The other nice thing here, by the way, and this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but if you teach multiple grade levels or you want to explore specificity on different standards, you'll notice that each of these is clickable as well. And it will take you to the page for that particular standard so that you can go a little bit deeper into what where the progression goes. The next alignment we have here to share with you is recurring themes and concepts. And we're very excited about this one, folks. The recurring themes and concepts, as I mentioned earlier, are those big ideas that all of the science content can be connected to. There are 7 recurring themes and concepts that we talk about. And really, the way brains work is the more we can take what seem to be discrete, independent facts and pin them on big ideas and broader concepts, the more likely we are to remember things because we understand how they're connected. I also think it's pretty exciting to be able to take ideas that students learn in kindergarten and ideas that students learn in 7th grade and be able to say, these ideas all belong, all have, are all examples of patterns in nature or patterns in engineering. Or these big ideas, these concepts here are all examples of energy flow or changes in matter, and be able to help students make connections between concepts that seem independent, but really follow largely similar patterns throughout science. So I want to take a moment though, and I want to highlight this language that we have right here for you. And forgive me, I'm going to read it word for word for you for a moment. It says recurring themes and concepts provide a connective structure for scientific ideas across disciplines. The connections below show some ways that teachers can help students understand how the content they are learning fits into the broader understanding of science. These connections do not represent all possible connections that might be made, but highlight some that are appropriate for this grade level. So the reason I wanted to read that aloud is because I will have some folks that look at the connections that we make here and go, but I could connect that idea to all 7 of the recurring themes and concepts. And yes, we actually went down that road. You know, you get a bunch of people that are very excited about science in the same room talking about recurring themes throughout all of science, and we wanted to make all the connections too. What we found is that oftentimes, either it was too many connections to think about presenting to a student on a student appropriate level, or B, some of the connections we were making were going beyond grade level content, and students really wouldn't have been able to follow that connection very well either. So we really wanted to focus on what we thought were the strongest connections. That being said, if you see other connections or you feel that there are other connections that are appropriate for your students, by all means, please make those connections. And we wanted to make sure that we were emphasizing for folks that there are other connections can be made, and you don't have to make all of these connections. Sometimes we made up to 4 or 5 connections, but if you have a limited time for that unit or that particular standard, you may not have the time to make all of those connections, and you may choose to make 1 or 2 of them. The idea is that you're helping students connect ideas. It's not that you make all the possible connections for them. In this particular case, we connected the idea of structures that animals have, allowing them to interact with their environment, to 3 different recurring themes and concepts. We connected it to patterns, modeling interdependence in parts of a system, and relationship between structure and function. Now, what I want to share with you on this page is you'll notice that each recurring theme and concept has a green box with some generic language about what that recurring theme and concept means. And then underneath that, you have a content-specific connection. So for patterns, anytime you see a pattern in TEKS Guide, under the recurring themes and concepts alignment, it will say patterns are regular sequences that can be found throughout nature. You'll find that every single time we talk about a pattern. What's going to be different and unique to each standard is what the connection is here. So in this case, we said that animals have similar structures and that scientists identify animals based on the patterns of their structures, such as the limb types used for moving. So, you know, if you're talking about animals that walk on all 4s, you're going to be talking about a very different set of animals than animals that have wings, which is a very different set of animals than animals that crawl using muscles on their stomachs, right? And so those are patterns that you can use to start to identify organisms. Interdependence in parts of the system. Our general language is that a system is a whole made of parts that work together, that has components and boundaries. It can interact with or be parts of other systems. In this case, we wanted to highlight for teachers and for teachers to be able to highlight for students that an animal is a system that is composed of parts, all right? Each of those parts help support basic needs for that organism. And so now we can make connections between the structures, which are the parts of the animal as a system that allow them to be successful in their environment. The third connection we made was between structure and function. You will notice that on some of these, particularly in kinder through grade 2, we've put a note in the general explanation to recognize the fact that that particular recurring theme and concept is not introduced as complexly as it could be in the lower grades. So in this case, with structure and function, we talked about the fact that a structure is an organized arrangement of particles, parts, or elements in a substance, body, or entity. And a function is the purpose or reason for something to exist. And that function of a structure depends on the shape and relationship between its essential parts. Now, in kindergarten through grade 2, we are less focused on how the shape and arrangement and relationship between parts leads to function. All right. We introduce it, but we toe dip into it. You don't get to that level of complexity until you get really to the later elementary and middle and high school grades. That being said, in this case, we did want to provide some examples of how structure and function are connected, because it's really directly called out in this standard when we talk about how do structures make organisms successful in their environment. So bats have large ears. They have specific structures in their noses that allow them to hunt insects through echolocation. Cheetahs have very muscular legs and slender bodies that allow them to sprint to make it easier for them to catch their prey. But again, we're trying to keep it pretty simple at the kindergarten level. The next piece you find when you do the drop down here is cross-curricular connections. And again, this is to illustrate some possible alignment between grade level concepts, all right? They don't represent all the possible connections that could be made. We wanted to keep it relatively narrow and specific. In this case, when you are talking about structures of animals in kindergarten, they may not have all the vocabulary to describe those structures using scientific names or terms. They probably won't. However, if they're already using the terms circle, triangle, rectangle, and square in their math content, or cylinder or cone or sphere, and then they can transfer that language over as they're trying to describe what they see in pictures of different structures, that's great. That's a fabulous opportunity for students to cross content with their vocabulary knowledge and integrate it in a way that's grade level appropriate. In English language arts, because there's only so many organisms that you are going to be able or willing to bring into your classroom for students to observe, they're going to be looking at pictures. You're going to want them to be able to clarify word meanings and identify words they do and don't know. You're going to want them to be able to evaluate details. Like if you want to ask students what structures on this organism are helping them to be successful in getting food, you want them to be able to identify and narrow down the scope of all the different structures they're looking at specifically to that question, as well as being able to synthesize information, right? So again, we just wanted to kind of highlight those pieces for you. The fourth element right over here is the side-by-side. And when you click on that, it takes you to this document. I'm going to zoom out. And I know this is not legible, but I do want to share this with you real quick. For each grade level in kindergarten through high school, we've created one of these documents. We have the standard that is going to be implemented on the left. We have the old standard on the right. And then we have some notes about things that were moved to the far right here. The way this is color-coded, language that is struck through and orange in the old standards is language that was removed from a standard. Language that is blue and double underlined on the left is language that was added for that particular standard. And then you'll notice some areas like right here. Well, actually, I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. Right here in kindergarten, it is new to demonstrate and explain that light travels through some objects and is blocked by other objects, creating shadows. That wasn't something that was taught in kindergarten before. So that's going to be new information, and that's important for educators to know as they're moving into this. Okay. So again, here we've talked about on the alignments page, vertical alignment, recurring themes and concepts alignment, cross-curricular connections, and then the side-by-side documents. In general vertical alignment, we addressed kindergarten through high school, and it is that progression to see how a concept is to be taught from one grade level to the next. Recurring themes and concepts alignment, we developed kindergarten through 8th grade. And the reason we stopped there is because kindergarten through 8th grade are the grade levels where they have a recurring themes and concepts alignment, a recurring themes and concepts strand that follows the scientific and engineering practices. So we wanted to build those intentional connections since the strand exists in those grade levels. In high school, the idea of recurring themes and concepts is addressed broadly in the introduction, but it doesn't have a specific strand reserved for it within the TEKS themselves. Cross-curricular connections, we developed kindergarten through 8 primarily because by the time you get to high school, it becomes more complex to do cross-curricular lessons when you have students taking courses in all various types of sequences, depending on what their plans are for post-secondary education. But in kinder through 8, pretty much everybody takes the same courses. And so it was easier to build those connections between grade level content. And then, of course, the side-by-sides are that direct comparison of old standards to new standards. I do want to mention that we will leave them posted through the 25-26 school year. After that, we will probably pull that resource down because most people will have done all the side-by-side comparisons they need to do. That being said, if you roll onto TEKS Guide or the science webpage in August of 2026 and you're trying to find the side-by-side and it's not there, we didn't throw it away and completely get rid of it. Just reach out to us and we can share those resources with you. All right, let me pull up the Q&A and see what we've got going on here. Okay, I will say broadly, I'm seeing some questions for the assessment team in here. I want to make sure that you guys get the most up-to-date and accurate answers on those assessment questions. So before we leave today, I'm going to show you where you can go to ask the assessment team the questions you have about those components. All right, I'm looking at the 5th grade TEKS, specifically the new TEKS in organisms and environment. They have very little information. Will these be expanded? For example, the cycling of matter in food webs. Do students need to know about carbon and nitrogen? No, they don't actually. And let me actually pull. What I will say specifically is that if you have specific standards, those are the perfect kind of thing to reach out to us through the curriculum help desk on, because if we don't have information in there that you need in order to clarify the boundaries around that standard, the upper and lower expectations for students, we want to make sure we get that in there. And if we get, a bunch of different requests for a particular standard, that makes it real easy for us to tell our leadership, hey, folks are asking a lot for this. We want to expand on our detailed explanations because we've gotten this much feedback about this particular one. And it makes it easy for us to have that data to support the need to make the change. So do please reach out. The other thing I want to plug is that we will be doing some office hours in late July and early August to support the rollout of the new TEKS and the TEKS guide. I will put those links in the chat as we get closer to the end so you can grab those. But end of July, early August, we have 4 different sets of office hours scheduled. And it's another great time to bring those grade level specific questions to the table. Let's see.
Sean, I put a link to that help desk in the chat as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julie. Were the lead forward side-by-sides built off of the TEA side-by-sides, or will we need to compare the two if that's what our district is using to access? Honestly, you would have to reach out to lead forward to ask them what resources they use to develop their side-by-sides. I'm not sure how they went about it. That being said, if you see discrepancies and you want some clarification, again, please reach out to us. We are a small but mighty team and fully recognize that sometimes we will need to make revisions as we go. So if you have questions or you see conflicting information, please do come to us. We are happy to clarify and dig in with you. Okay, I see a question about how does this address scientific and engineering practices? Thank you so much. I am going to show you some examples here in just a moment within some middle school and high school standards where we've integrated some of the scientific and engineering practice resources to help teachers know how those should look. Where can we find the side-by-side document? Great. So let me show you from here. Once you've clicked on a standard, you're going to go to the alignments tab right over here on the right side. And then you can come over here to the right of the drop down and you'll see the button for the side-by-side for that particular grade level. The other place that the side-by-side is available is on the TEA science page. When you come down here to Science TEKS resources, here's TEKS guide. Here are all the side-by-side documents. There's another tool called TEKS in Focus that we can talk about a little bit later. Here are some PDFs of vertical alignments. They are long, they are tiny. I'm honestly much more excited about the vertical alignment laid out in TEKS Guide. It's a lot more usable for me, but these are here in PDF format. Some other resources regarding recurring themes and concepts and safety. And then some of the things that we've linked into TEKS Guide that I'm going to show you how to access in a different format later. But this kind of helps answer the SEP question a little bit as well. We have some one-pagers that our STEM coordinator has developed around engineering design process, engineering design components, claims, evidence, and reasoning. And these documents are to help support teachers in understanding what they are and how they might be implemented and approached in the classroom. And we did link to these in several places in TEKS Guide that I will highlight for you in just a moment. Okay. So what I want to do next, there is one more piece coming in alignments that I want to share with you. These are still in publication, so we don't have them available yet, but I just wanted to let you know that they are coming. Are the breakouts. All right, so what a breakout is it is where you take a standard and you break it out into all of the different components of that standard that have discrete pieces of information that a student should know. All right, and part of it is because some of these standards are pretty complex. The example you see on the screen right now is from kindergarten. It says a student is expected to develop and use models to represent phenomena, objects, and processes, or design a prototype for a solution to a problem. So the student's expected to do several things. They're expected to develop models. They're also expected to use models. So when you click this little radio button right here, it's going to break out develop and use. Then when you click the plus sign right here, it's going to say, what are students supposed to develop models to do? Well, they're supposed to develop models to represent phenomenon or design a prototype, to represent objects or design a prototype, and to represent processes or design a prototype. In addition, when this goes live, you'll be able to click this plus button and it'll say, what are students supposed to use models to be able to do? And again, it'll be to represent phenomena, represent objects, represent processes. And the idea here is this way, when you're evaluating your resources and you're trying to ensure, A, that your students are getting instruction in all of the TEKS and all of the parts of the TEKS, you have a tool that helps make that easier. The other element is, as you're thinking about, does a standard need to be spiraled or reinforced or taught again? It may not be the whole standard. It may be a particular breakout that your students are struggling with. And this is a visual tool to help you identify what are all of the elements of that particular standard. These are being developed in kindergarten through high school. And we will announce through the science newsletter once these have been added to the TEKS Guide. But I did want to share with you that these are coming. Okay. Before we go into the next section, what I want to do is share with you some examples from middle school and high school of some of these different elements that are different than what you're going to see in elementary. So to do that, let me come back out to the TEKS Guide itself. And we are going to start by taking a look at some detailed explanations in middle school. So I'm going to look at 6, 7B. So let me go to grade 6. I'm going to go to 7B. So here, the standard is the student is expected to calculate the net force on an object in a horizontal or vertical direction using diagrams and determine if the forces are balanced or unbalanced. So in this case, we wanted to really explain what are we talking about when we talk about diagrams that are appropriate at the 6th grade level, and what are our boundaries on those diagrams. So let me zoom in on this page a little bit here. And so for the detailed explanation for diagrams for the standard, we said that net force diagrams illustrate and model the magnitude and direction of forces on an object. Students should illustrate the forces acting on the object, calculate the magnitude and direction of the net force. A net force of 0 means that the forces are balanced. A net force with a value other than 0 indicates that the forces are unbalanced. Now, we did put a boundary on this one. In Tier 1 instruction, grade 6 students only calculate net force in horizontal and vertical directions. Forces at angles other than 90 degrees are beyond grade level, and acceleration is taught in grade 8. So that being said, let's say you have a kiddo that's already learning Pythagorean theorem or learning other geometric skills in 6th grade because they are that advanced in math. You may throw some more advanced problems at them. But in Tier 1 instruction, we're only looking at net force on one plane. All right, we're either going vertical or horizontal, right? We're not coming in at angles. All students need to be able to do vertical and horizontal net force. You may have some advanced mathematics students that are ready to go deeper, and you may want to collaborate with some of your mathematics teachers on campus if you notice you have students with those advanced skill sets. In addition to that detailed explanation, we talk about forces in vertical and horizontal directions. Sometimes it's helpful to have images to help understand what that means, particularly if you are a brand new teacher to middle school content or a brand new teacher to some of this physics content. It's helpful to see a diagram. So we provided one here that shows what we mean when we talk about, in this case, horizontal forces, right? We have a cart here that shows that we have a force of 60 newtons and a force of 30 newtons, both pushing this cart to the right. So your net force is a total of 90 newtons to the right. In this case, you've got a force of 30 newtons pushing to the right, 10 newtons pushing to the left. Your net force is 20 newtons to the right. But again, we're not really talking about acceleration at this point. We're not talking about what happens if you're going up a ramp and now you've got forces that are in the vertical and the horizontal direction at the same time. It's just very cut and dry, straightforward. We wanted to provide that example. The next one I want to take a peek at is 612B. So symbiotic relationships came down to middle school from high school in the new standards. And so we wanted to ensure that we provided some support around what those look like. One, we have a detailed explanation about what do students need to know about these relationships. And then we have glossary terms for what each of these relationships are. But in the further explanation, we provided specific examples. Again, this is new content to middle school, and so we wanted to make sure that we provided that support to middle school teachers. You've got a paragraph that has an example of mutualism along with a picture to go with it. You have a paragraph that demonstrates an example of commensalism along with a picture. And then an example of parasitism. And this is another thing we did with some of these further explanations. We wanted to provide some examples that are maybe not as obvious. A lot of us, when we think about parasites, will immediately think about fleas, we'll think about tapeworms, things like that. But there's other forms of parasitism. In this case, we wanted to highlight an example called brood parasitism, where these particular birds, cuckoos and cowbirds, they don't build their own nests. They go steal the nests of others and kick their eggs out and put their own eggs in. Still parasitism, but not the kind that we always think about. Okay. 810C, let's take a peek at that one. All right. So folks, here we're talking about ocean currents and air masses. This is complex content. And one of the things that we wanted to do was provide, again, some pictures that help clarify what's actually happening when air masses are interacting over the oceans. And what does it mean when we say that the warm water is causing a storm to gain more energy, and why does that work? And so again, we provided some examples and some images that really kind of help provide some visuals for what's actually happening with these more complex dynamics. Next one I want to take a peek at is 87B. Here we're talking about Newton's 3 laws. Newton's laws got broken up in some interesting ways in middle school. At this point, we are learning third law in grade 6, first law in grade 7. And then in grade 8, they learn second law, and then they integrate all 3 of those. All right. So in this particular standard, the goal is that they model motion using all 3 of Newton's laws and talk about how those forces acting within the system and the describe the forces acting within the system and the acceleration caused by those net forces. So you're integrating all of Newton's laws together in this standard and not talking about them independently. In this case, the further explanation is more about making sure that that 8th grade teacher has a deep understanding of what each of these laws mean, so that when you're working on activities with students to integrate all 3, you feel confident in your understanding. So this one is very text heavy, but it's providing that deeper and richer understanding for the educator so that they can help students integrate the 3 concepts. Now we're going to look at some high school standards. Let me shift to biology. And we're going to look at 8B. Okay, y'all, this one is for those of y'all that have taught bio, I used to be a bio teacher. There's a lot going on here. Students are doing monohybrid and dihybrid crosses. Students are exploring non-Mendelian traits, including incomplete dominance, codominance, sex-linked, and multiple alleles. There's a lot going on in every single one of those categories. So we did provide a detailed explanation for each. Within the further explanation, we talked about sex-linked traits. What are some human examples? Because, we all become more interested when it comes to being potentially about us. We talked about blood typing as an example of multiple alleles, and we really kind of tried to spell out what happens when you have A and B blood alleles versus having neither A or B alleles. And then also there's a little bit of haziness sometimes about the relationship between codominance and multiple alleles. So we wanted to provide some specificity here. A trait can exhibit both codominance and have multiple alleles. But just because a trait has multiple alleles doesn't mean it's going to display codominance. Again, this is something that you may or may not feel the need to bring up with your students, but it's helpful to understand as a teacher when you are looking for different examples to share with your students and have them explore. I've got one more bio that I want to share with you, and then I want to share a few chemistry ones with you, and then I will take a look at the rest of the questions. 10A. So here we're talking about natural selection and how it produces changes in populations, not in individuals. Again, we have a detailed explanation in order to kind of talk about what do we mean when we talk about changes in populations. But then really it's the further explanation that I wanted to highlight, because here's where we brought in some misconceptions. Of course, one of the earliest misconceptions we have around the impact of adaptation on natural selection is proposed by Lamarck. And his concept was that, if a giraffe wants to reach higher leaves, it's going to stretch its neck. And then that giraffe that has stretched its neck will be able to pass those stretched neck genes on to their kids. That's a misconception. That's not how it works. It has to be carried in the eggs and sperm in order to be passed on to the kids. Another misconception is that environmental conditions are responsible for changes in traits causing adaptations to occur. Again, we talked about how are changes to DNA caused, right? Because it's not the change in the trait that causes the change in the DNA. It's a change in DNA that can cause a change in a trait. And then really kind of discussing what is evolutionary fitness. So again, may not be a level of detail that your students need. However, it's important for that biology teacher to have it in your back pocket so that you have a strong understanding and can support your students if they give you the questions that lead you to need that information. All right, we're going to shift into some chemistry now. We're going to look at chemistry 10B. And here the student is expected to describe and calculate relationships among volume, pressure, number of moles, and temperature. In this case, we did go ahead and talk a little bit about this as the ideal gas law, which is a combination of Boyle's, Charles, Avogadro's, and the Gay-Lussac's law. But it's important to note that in Tier 1 instruction, students are not expected to memorize the names of these gas law formulas. It's about using the gas laws, not memorizing whose law is which. We did want to provide and found a visual that helps kind of model how all of these different variables work together for the different gas laws. Some students may find this helpful. Other students, this would be way much information overload and would not be helpful at all. Quite frankly, the same is possibly true with teachers. Some teachers may look at this and go, yes, that is exactly what I needed to understand the relationship between all these laws. Others may say, just tell me what they are and let me look at them. But again, we wanted to provide some background and some additional deeper support that may help teachers when they get those additional questions from students in terms of trying to define the relationship between these variables and gas laws. And then on 11D, we had one of the things that led us to creating this particular further explanation. So let me back up a little bit. The student expectation is that students are expected to investigate the general rules regarding solubility and predict the solubility of products, specifically of a double replacement reaction. Well, we had a request for, well, what solubility rules should we be using with our students? And the answer is, that's up to you. But just saying that is not particularly helpful to a new teacher. So what we did within this further explanation was said, A, there are multiple sets of rules that you could use. Here's one. This is one that's already developed. It's a relatively simple set of rules for solubility, but then we also highlighted that it is less important that students memorize solubility rules than that students are able to use them appropriately and consistently. So largely, the overall expectation, or for this particular student expectation, is that students are provided with a list of solubility rules, and then they prove that they know how to use them in different situations. Again, we didn't want to leave that brand new chemistry teacher hanging and trying to figure out where on earth they're supposed to find these solubility rules, but we also don't want to narrow you down. So if you have a textbook that provides a different list of solubility rules, or you are a pre-AP chemistry teacher and you're trying to prep kids for AP Chem, by all means, use whatever is appropriate for your kids. But if you need a starting place, we wanted to provide one. And I've got one more example for you. We're going to go to Chemistry 11F. So one of the things that we tried to do with some of these standards is provide some context as to why is this important to learn. In this case, the student is expected to calculate dilutions of solutions using molarity. The standard itself is pretty clear, right? Like they're going to calculate dilutions, they're going to use molarity to do it. However, you have a kiddo that asks you, why do I need to know this? That may be a bit more of a challenge for teachers to answer. So within our further explanation, we wanted to provide some examples of why dilutions are important and why different people might make dilutions. We talked about prescription drugs that need to be appropriately diluted. Pool or aquarium chemicals often need to be diluted to the right amount, depending upon the amount of water that is in that pool or aquarium. And then thinking about cleaning chemicals, right? Just because something is more concentrated doesn't mean it's going to be better or faster. If you use something in too high of a concentration, then that could be hazardous to human health. So that provides some context for teachers to share with students as needed. Okay, I'm going to come back to the Q&A.
Shauna, we've been troubleshooting the Q&A questions as well on our end. So most of those have already been answered from the previous documents.
Fabulous, thank you. Do you personally have recommended resources for teachers who want more explicit, updated TEKS clarity for their grade areas? For instance, an education company hosting a 4 through 8 science seminar or crash course. The best I can tell you, folks, is if you feel like something is lacking within TEKS Guide, if you feel like there's an area that needs further explanation, or even if you just have personal questions and you're like, I don't even know if this needs to go in TEKS Guide, but I want TEA to clarify this for me so I'm doing the best job I can as an educator, please, folks, reach out. Send us an email to the help desk. I promise you we're responsive. All of us on the science team used to be in the classroom teaching science. And it's part of our favorite part of our job is to nerd out on the content that we teach and that we expect kids to learn with you. So if you have specific questions, we're happy to answer them. Depending on how those office hours go in August, in late July and early August, we will see about hosting more opportunities as well for that. Okay. Now what I would like to do is I'm going to pop up a poll and collect some feedback from you guys based upon what you've heard today. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend the Science TEKS guide to colleagues? And while you are doing that, if you need a certificate today, so you get credit for CEUs, you can go to this link to get that certificate. I do want to share, I will come back to this page, I promise, but I'm going to pop out and show you something really quick. When you go to that link, and actually while I'm here, let me grab this and throw it in the chat for you. So there's the link to this certificate. What you will do, oh wait, hold on one sec, y'all. That's when it's supposed to go to a sign-in page. Give me just a moment. Forgive me, folks. Let me go grab that link again because that's not where that's supposed to take you. Glad I clicked it. What on earth? Why is it doing that? Okay. Tell you what, I'm going to troubleshoot what's going on with the certificate. And I have the email address of everybody who participated today. So I will send out an email with how to get that certificate if that is a need you have. As soon as I finish troubleshooting why that link is not playing nicely for me. Let me take a peek in the Q&A, see if we have some more questions. One. Is there a link to get the entire glossary for a grade level? There is not. Reach out to me via email if you want to talk about that. I don't know if that's something that we can provide or not. Let me think on that. And that's something that I think, actually, let me think on that and talk to leadership, and we will include that whenever we develop a Q&A about TEKS guide and how to use it. The last couple slides that I wanted to share with you. One is on our help desk. When you go to this website, whoops, helpdesk.tea.texas.gov, you'll see a whole lot of different areas where you can go to ask questions. The two I wanted to highlight for you for this particular resource are curriculum and assessment. Any questions you have over STAR, over the bridge assessment year, readiness supporting, anything like that needs to go to the assessment team. Not that I don't want to help answer your questions, but there's a lot of moving parts and sometimes things change quickly and we don't always have the time to tell each other about it immediately. So if I send you to assessment, I'll know for sure you're getting the 100% correct answer in that moment. Whereas if I try to answer it, I may spread misinformation that I would feel bad about. But anything that's about, what is the clarity of the standards? I think you guys should add a detailed explanation. Can you explain this more to me? Those things come to us in curriculum. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, you can do that here. And I'm going to go into whoops, excuse me one moment. I'm putting the link for the newsletter in the chat right now. Oh, nope, sorry, that's not the link to the newsletter. Let me try that again. Control C. There's the link to the newsletter. The link to the help desk that I shared previous, that I think Julie shared earlier as well, is also now in the chat. And then very last, folks, if you could tell me how I did today, I would appreciate it. When we built this deck, we were hoping it was going to be Carla and Liz and myself. Thankfully, one of the three of us still has internet. But I'd love to get some feedback from you. We have one more of these sessions to go later this month. We will be sharing the deck as well as the recording later this month on the Science webpage, and we will also announce it through the Science newsletter. And I will stay on the line a little bit longer if you have more questions. Yes, I see questions about the certificate. I've got to troubleshoot it, but I will send out an email to everybody that participated in this webinar today, letting you know how to access that certificate after we get off of the call. And then I see a question about how to access the newsletter. Let me throw that link in the chat again. And then the feedback link, people are asking for that one as well. Let me go back and grab that for you. Let me see. Help desk. Yeah, it's newsletter. Here we go. And I'm about to throw the link to the survey in the chat. There you go. Thanks again, folks. I really appreciate your time today and your participation. We look forward to hearing from you and continue moving forward. Oh, I forgot that I was going to show you the registration for the office hours. So, and actually, this is helping me to highlight another feature on our website, y'all. When you look, just one moment, at the Science TEA page, if you are looking for old newsletters, they are archived over here on the side. And the most recent newsletter right here has these office hour dates posted. So if you go to the most recent newsletter on the right-hand side of the Science webpage, you will see this within that newsletter. And I'm about to see how awful it looks if I take this and throw it in the chat for you. Nope, it didn't hold any of the links. Okay. So right now, your best bet to grab the links for those office hours is to go to the TEA Science webpage. We are also going to have them posted up in this new blue box. Hopefully later today or tomorrow. We've submitted the changes to our web team to make, but we will have all those Zoom links posted here in this blue box on the Science page if you would like to join us for an office hour in late July or early August. Okay. Yes, I still see some folks asking about the certificates. Y'all, I'm gonna have to troubleshoot the link for some reason. I promise I tried it earlier today and it took me to the certificate, but when I just tried to share it with y'all, it took you to a sign-in page. So I need to troubleshoot it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send an email out to everybody who attended today's webinar, and I will send you the link to the certificate so that you can take care of that after the fact. I have a request for the survey link. Yes, let me go grab that survey link for you.
I got it, Shauna. It's already in there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julie. And then I see a question about training on specific grade levels. If you attend the grade level session for the office hours here, we've got it broken down into administrators and supervisors, elementary, middle, and high school. If the only session you can attend is outside of your grade band, please attend whatever session you're available to attend. But we are going to focus our frequently asked questions and on the grade level that we have posted to those days. And then as we find that we have demand for a particular grade level or content, then we will add times as well. Let's see, in the Q&A, somebody's asking me to link the survey or the newsletter link. Let me find that. Okay, thanks again, folks. I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar. I appreciate your time today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.